bill of sale was in my hand. 11 by 14 cream paper, my late husband's signature notarized at the bottom corner in ink that had gone the color of weak tea. Across the table, my son's wife was telling me, very kindly, that they'd had to make some creative choices about the photo. I set the paper down. I did not raise my voice. I said, "Brooke, I think you should look at the back of that painting before you hang it anywhere else. That's where this ends. Let me tell you where it started. My name is Pearl Lindqvist. I'm 70 years old. I framed other people's masterpieces for 31 years at a gallery on Hennepin Avenue, and I raised one son mostly alone after my husband Arne died of a heart that gave out on a Tuesday in March like it had somewhere better to be. I tell you this because you need to know that I have spent my whole working life standing 2 feet from things worth more than houses, matting them, backing them, making sure the light hit them right, and then stepping out of the frame myself. Nobody photographs the framer. That's the job. You disappear so the art can be seen. I did not expect my own family to take that lesson and run with it. It started, like most of these things do, with a text message I almost missed, because I was elbow deep in bread dough. My granddaughter Hadley, 16, sent it from her bedroom 30 feet from where I sat in the guest room of my son's house in Eagan, Minnesota the week before Christmas. Mom wants to know if Grandma Pearl has a different cardigan. The maroon one clashes with the set. The set. That's what they were calling it, not the living room, the set. My son Connor had married Brooke 9 years ago, and Brooke had spent those 9 years building a life that looked, from any reasonable distance, like an advertisement for a life. She ran a small but very tidy home staging business, the kind where you Instagram a bowl of lemons and call it a centerpiece. And every December she turned their house into what she referred to, without irony, as the content house. Garlands measured to the inch, a specific shade of cream they called oat. And this year, the literal backdrop of the family holiday portrait, the one that would go on cards to 400 people and live forever on a mantle, was going to be my painting, on loan. Because Brooke had asked to borrow it 11 days earlier, standing in my kitchen with her phone already out to take a picture of it, saying the words that I will repeat to you exactly as she said them. "Pearl, this would be so the vibe for the portrait. Can we hang it behind the tree, just for the shoot?" I'd said yes. Of course I'd said yes. It was a painting I loved being loved. Here's the detail you need to hold on to, the one nobody else in that house was thinking about on the morning of the shoot. The painting was not a print. It was not a poster from a furniture store. It was an original oil, 42 by 60 inches, by a Minnesota regionalist named Otto Halverson, painted in 1958, the year before he stopped painting altogether, and went to work in a creamery in Wadena until he died. Arna and I bought it in 1981 for $600 from a widow who needed the money more than the memory, and we hung it in our dining room for 40 years, and after Arna passed, I had it appraised. Not because I planned to sell it, but because a person likes to know what's on her wall. The number the appraiser wrote down made my hand go a little unsteady on the pen when I signed the form. I never told Connor. I never told Brooke. There was no occasion to. You don't bring up a number like that at Thanksgiving. It sits quiet, like most important things do, in a drawer with the receipts and the deed. So that was the situation, the morning of December the 14th, my painting on their wall. My family in front of it, and me upstairs being asked, gently, through my own granddaughter, to change my sweater because I clashed with myself. I changed the sweater. I want to be honest with you about that. I'm not going to sit here and tell you I marched downstairs in maroon out of principle. I put on the gray one Brooke had laid out on the guest bed without asking me, a soft dove gray that did, I'll admit, sit nicely against the cream and the green of the tree. I looked in the mirror and I looked, if I'm honest, lovely. 70 years old and still vain enough to notice. I came downstairs smelling of the rose water I've worn since 1979, and I walked into that living room ready to stand with my family in front of a piece of my own history, and I want you to remember that feeling, because in about 4 minutes it was going to be taken from me without anyone in that room raising their voice either. The house smelled of cinnamon and the cold, sharp green of a tree that had only been up 4 days, still shedding onto Brooke's white runner rug. A diffuser was going somewhere, clove and orange. The smell Brooke called holiday, the way other people just call it Christmas. Miles, 11, lay on his stomach under the dining table with a tablet, the only person in the house unbothered by what the morning was supposed to accomplish. He looked up once and said, "Hi, Grandma," in the flat, sincere way children speak before they learn to perform sincerity for adults. For one small moment, that was the nicest thing anyone said to me all day. Hadley was already dressed, a cream sweater of her own, hair curled in waves Brooke had clearly spent 20 minutes shaping with a wand iron still plugged in on the bathroom counter, its cord curled like a question mark. She caught my eye in the hallway mirror and gave me the smile teenagers give when they're apologizing in advance for something that isn't technically their fault yet. I didn't know what she meant by it. I found out 4 minutes later. Connor came down behind me in a navy sweater I happened to recognize, because I'd given it to him for his 40th birthday 2 years before, and there was a small private comfort in that. Standing next to my son in front of a painting his father and I had bought together, in a sweater I'd bought him myself, inside a house full of borrowed elegance that was, in at least 2 specific and traceable ways, entirely mine to begin with. I held on to that comfort for exactly as long as it lasted, which, as I've told you, was not very long. The photographer's name was Desmond Caro, and he had, I will say, a beautiful eye. He'd come recommended by 3 of Brooke's clients, and his Instagram was full of families arranged like flower arrangements, everyone's chin at the exact angle that flatters, and nobody's hand visibly resting anywhere. He arrived with 2 lens bags and a portable light he called a softbox, which he set up near the front window with the brisk, practiced quiet of a man who has done this in 40 other living rooms that all wanted to look like this one. He smelled faintly of coffee and the cold air still clinging to his coat. He had Connor and Brooke and the 2 kids arranged in front of the painting within 10 minutes, the green and gold of Halverson's autumn field glowing behind them like something out of a furniture catalog, which, in fairness, is exactly what Brooke wanted it to look like. She stood between her children with one hand resting lightly on Miles's shoulder, the other smoothing a wrinkle out of her own sleeve that nobody else would ever have noticed. And she was smiling the particular smile she wore in every photograph of her own staged rooms, pleased, proprietary, a woman standing inside something she had built. Then he turned to me. "Pearl, can you scoot in next to Connor?" "Actually," he said, and he held up his hands like he was framing a shot, which I suppose he was. "Actually, let's try you on the end." I went to the end. I've spent a career going where I was told to go relative to the art. He took maybe 40 photographs. I know because I counted the shutter clicks the way you count anything, when you sense, before you can name it, that you are being managed rather than included. After the 40th click, he lowered the camera and said, to Brooke, not to me, "I think for the card itself we go with the 4 of you. Tighter composition. We can do a separate one with Pearl after." Nobody asked me if that was all right. Nobody asked me anything. Brooke said, "Oh, yeah, that's probably cleaner," in the voice she used for deciding between 2 paint swatches, and Connor, my son, my own boy, said nothing at all. He looked at his shoes. "I want you to notice that, not at me. At his shoes." I stood to the side while they did the separate one. It took 4 minutes. The flash went off, soft and disinterested, 4 times, the way you'd photograph a fact you needed for insurance purposes rather than a person you loved. Hadley caught my eye once during it and gave me a look I recognized, because I'd given that exact look to my own mother-in-law in 1986, the look that says, "I know this is wrong, and I am 16, and I am not going to be the one who says so." I did not say so either, not yet. I went into the kitchen and I put the kettle on, and the click of the burner igniting was the loudest sound in the house for a long moment, and I stood there with my hand flat on the cold marble counter Brooke had installed the year before, and I let myself feel exactly one thing, fully, before I put it away. I had been edited out of my own family's Christmas. The kettle took its time, the way kettles do when you're standing over them wanting them to hurry. I could hear from the living room Desmond saying, "Beautiful, hold that, just hold that," to 4 people who were, at that exact moment, standing in front of a window into a Minnesota field that had not existed since 1958, painted by a man who'd spent the last years of his life smelling of curdled milk and creamery steam instead of linseed oil, because nobody had thought his paintings worth much of anything while he was alive to need the money. I thought about that, about how little the world pays attention to a thing's value until long after it would have mattered to the person who made it. And I thought, not for the first time, that the same arithmetic seemed to be running quietly, under my own family's roof. The kettle whistled. I poured the water over a tea bag and watched it bloom dark in the cup. And that was Act 1, if you want to call it that. That's the recognition. If you've lived it, you know there's no thunderclap. There's a kettle, there's a counter, there's a son looking at his shoes. Let me back up 11 days. Because while all of that was happening in that living room, I had already made one small, quiet decision that none of them knew about. And it is the reason this story ends the way it does. When Brooke asked to borrow the painting, I'd said yes. But I am a framer by trade, and framers do not let valuable work leave a wall without a piece of paper. It is not suspicion. It is simply how you treat anything that matters. You write down what it is, where it's going, and when it's coming back. I had typed up, on my own laptop, in my own kitchen, a one-page loan agreement, the kind I'd typed 100 times at the gallery for clients, lending pieces to museums and law offices, and once, memorably, to a senator's office in Washington. Item: oil on canvas. Otto Halverson. October Light, 1958. Owner: Pearl A. Lindqvist. Borrower: Brooke Lindqvist. Purpose: photography, single use. Return date: December 26th. Insured value, stated in writing, in a number I had circled. The way you circle a number, you expect someone to actually read. I brought 2 copies to the house the morning of the shoot, in a manila envelope, smelling faintly of the cedar drawer I kept my important papers in. I'd set the envelope on the front hall table, under my coat, where Brooke would see it eventually, and Connor would not see it at all, because Connor, God love him, has never once in his life looked closely at a piece of paper that wasn't a receipt. Brooke had glanced at the loan form when I handed it to her that morning, smiled the smile she gives contractors when she doesn't intend to read the fine print, and signed it without reading the insured value line. Because why would she? It was, to her, a formality, a grandmother thing, cute, even, the kind of fussy paperwork old people do. You really don't need to do this, Pearl, she'd said, signing with the pen I'd brought, not even the one already sitting in the little dish by her own front door. It's just for the photo. Humor me, I'd said. I spent 30 years making sure things came back to the people who owned them. It's a habit, not a worry. She'd laughed, a light, easy laugh, and tucked the page into the kitchen drawer where she kept warranty cards and takeout menus, and apparently, anything else she considered paperwork rather than substance. And that was that. That signed paper sat in that drawer, unread past the signature line, for the entire morning that they cropped me out of my own Christmas. I want to be clear that on the morning of the 14th, I did not yet know exactly what I was going to do with that paper. I only knew, with the kind of certainty you get from 40 years of handling things other people undervalue, that I was holding something. I just hadn't decided yet when to set it on the table. That decision came 8 days later, on the 22nd, 3 days before Christmas, when the cards arrived from the printer. Connor brought a box of them over to my condo himself. 400 glossy cardstock photographs, the painting glowing gold behind his family, happy holidays from the Lindqvists, in a script font Brooke had probably spent 40 minutes choosing. He set the box on my kitchen table with the particular cheerfulness of a man who has not thought, even once, about what is missing from the photo in his hands. "Don't they look great?" he said. Desmond really nailed the light. I picked up a card. There they were. Connor, Brooke, Hadley, Miles, arranged like a magazine spread in front of October Light, the autumn fields stretching gold and rust behind their 4 smiling faces, and at the edge of the frame, where I had stood for 4 flash-blind minutes, there was nothing, just more painting, just more of my husband's $600, now 6-figure gift to a woman who'd needed money more than memory, glowing where I should have been. I turned the card over, the way you turn over any object when you want a moment longer before you have to say something. The back was blank, glossy, faintly cool against my thumb. 400 of these were going out to 400 mailboxes across the country. Old colleagues of Connor's, Brooke's clients, My own bridge group, people who had known me 40 years and would open this envelope expecting, without thinking about it, to see me in it. I held that card for what felt like a long time. Connor was already at the refrigerator, looking for the good cream cheese, talking about whether they should mail them before or after New Year's. "It's a lovely photo," I said, and it was. That's the part that stayed with me longest. Not that it was bad, but that it was beautiful, and I wasn't in it, and the thing making it beautiful was mine. Connor didn't hear the weight in my voice. He never has been good at that, not since he was small. "Brooke thought the 5 of us made it too busy," he said, not looking up from the fridge. "You know how she gets about composition." Composition. There's a word I know intimately. I spent 31 years matting other people's compositions, making sure nothing in the frame distracted from the thing that mattered. I had been treated, on my own family's Christmas card, as the distraction. I did not say anything cruel to my son that day. I want you to know that, because I think it matters. I have never once, in this whole story, raised my voice or said a word I'd be ashamed to have repeated back to me. What I did instead was go to my hallway closet, take down a hat box where I keep things I don't show anyone, and add that Christmas card to the folder where I already kept the signed loan agreement, the insurance appraisal, and a photocopy of the original 1981 bill of sale, with Arna's tea-colored signature at the bottom. I was building a record. That is the only kind of weapon I have ever believed in. The actual portrait, the big one, framed, the one meant for the mantel above the fireplace where Brooke had been photographing the staging progress for her business page for 2 weeks, went up on Christmas Eve. I was there for it. I watched my son hang it himself, proud, level it twice with a little bubble app on his phone, step back and say, "There," the way men say "there," when they've finished a task that means something to them, even if they can't quite say what. I looked at that photograph on the wall. Connor, Brooke, Hadley, Miles, glowing gold, my husband's painting behind them like a window into a field that never existed except in Otto Halverson's mind, and on my dining room wall for 40 years. And there was a precise, empty rectangle of space at the left edge where I had stood, and where, now, there was simply more painting, more of mine. I'm going to pause here and speak to you directly, because I suspect some of you watching already know exactly what I'm describing, even if your version had a different painting, or a kitchen table instead of a portrait, or a grandchild's wedding instead of a Christmas card. You know the moment, I mean. The moment you realize that you have been treated, by people who say they love you, as logistics, a line item, something to be arranged or removed depending on whether it serves the picture. I am not going to tell you how to feel about that, because you already know how you felt about it. I'm only going to tell you what I did. Maybe it'll be useful. Maybe it'll just be company. What I did was nothing, for 3 more days. I want to be honest about that, too. I did not confront anyone on Christmas Eve. I ate the meal Brooke had spent 2 days preparing, and I will say, since I promised you fairness in this telling, that the meal was genuinely lovely. And Brooke had also, without being asked, made sure there was a dairy-free dessert for Miles's stomach issues, and a second one, plain shortbread, because she remembered, unprompted, that it was the one thing Arna used to make every December, and that I hadn't made it myself since he died. She set a plate of it in front of me without a word, just set it down and moved on to refill water glasses, and for one strange minute, I did not know what to do with the kindness sitting next to the slight. People are like that. I want you to know I never forgot it, even later, even when I was holding the card I was about to play. I ate the shortbread. I said it was good. It was good. Dinner itself was the kind of meal that looks, from any photograph, like the platonic ideal of a family holiday, the good china out, candles burning low and steady, the particular warm smell of roasted bird and browned butter, sitting over everything like a held breath. Connor said grace, the same 3 sentences he's said every year since his father died, and at the end of it he added, the way he always does, "And thank you for Mom, who's put up with all of us a long time." Everyone laughed, gently, the comfortable laugh of people who think a joke and a truth can't occupy the same sentence. I laughed too. I want you to know that. I was not, even then, performing wounded dignity at the table. I was simply waiting, the way you wait for water to boil when you already know it's going to. Hadley asked me, somewhere between the turkey and the pie, whether I'd always loved that painting, and I told her the story, the widow in 1981, the $600, the creamery in Wadena. And Brooke, refilling wine glasses across the table, said lightly, "It really is the perfect color story for the room. I keep telling Connor we should see if you'd let us hang something like it permanently." Something like it, not it. As though the specific painting, the specific 40 years on my own wall, were an interchangeable detail in her color scheme, rather than the very thing that had made her photograph glow the way it did. I didn't correct her. Some sentences are worth letting a person say all the way out loud, so that later, when the truth catches up to them, they remember exactly how casually they said it. I drove home that night with the painting still hanging on their wall, the return date 3 days off, and the loan agreement sitting unread in that kitchen drawer, and I slept, I'll tell you honestly, quite well. I want to tell you what happened in the 3 days between Christmas Eve and the return date, because they weren't empty, even though nothing visible happened in them. I called my friend Joni, who I'd worked beside at the gallery for 2 decades, and who had, over the years, heard every version of every story I'm telling you now, usually before I'd fully decided what I thought about it myself. "They cropped you out," she said, when I told her, not as a question. "They cropped me out." Pearl. There was a pause, the particular pause of a woman setting down whatever she'd been holding so she could give a thing her full attention. "Did you tell them what's on the back of that canvas?" "Not yet." "Why not yet?" I thought about that for longer than I expected to. "Because I want them to find it the way you find a price tag you didn't think to look for," I said. "Not because I told them, because they finally looked." Joni laughed, not unkindly. "You're a cruel woman, Pearl Lindqvist." "I'm a patient one," I said. "There's a difference, even if it doesn't always look like one from the outside." She didn't argue with that. Joni never does, when I'm right. And she knew, the way only a woman who'd spent 20 years matting canvases beside me could know, that I wasn't being cruel at all. I was simply doing what I'd always done with anything fragile and undervalued, waiting for the right light to put it in. On the morning of the 26th, the return date written, in my own handwriting, on a loan agreement Brooke had signed without reading, I drove back to Egan with a soft cotton blanket and a roll of bubble wrap in the trunk of my car, and I rang my own son's doorbell like a guest. Hadley answered. She looked, for just a second, relieved to see me, the way teenagers look when an adult arrives, who they suspect might finally say the thing everyone's been avoiding. "Grandma," she said, "are you here for the painting?" "I am," I said. "It's time it came home." She didn't ask why I said home and not back, even though it had hung in that house for 13 days, and I'd called it home like it had always been mine, which it had, and which she was old enough, I think, to understand, without my spelling it out. Brooke was in the kitchen, going through a box of leftover gift wrap, sorting it the way she sorted everything, by color family. She looked up when I came in, holding the blanket. "Oh, were we supposed to send that back already?" she said, lightly, the way you'd say it about a borrowed casserole dish. "Today's the return date," I said. "It's right there on the agreement." I watched something flicker behind her eyes. Not guilt yet, not quite. More like the first instant of recalculating a number she'd assumed was small. "Right, of course," she said. "I'll have Connor help you load it." This is the part of the story where most people imagine I said something sharp. I didn't. I went into the living room, and I looked once more at where it had hung. Gold field, blue distance, the particular slant of light Halverson got right exactly once in his short career, before the creamery took the rest of his life. And I lifted it down myself before Connor even came downstairs, because I have lifted heavier and more fragile things than that off of walls for 31 years, and there is a kind of dignity in not waiting to be helped with something that is, after all, yours. It was wrapped, blanketed, and sitting upright in the back seat of my car within 20 minutes. The bubble wrap crackled softly each time I shifted it to check the straps. A small, ordinary sound, the only sound in that driveway. While inside the house, I'd find out later, Brooke had finally opened the manila folder I'd left in a kitchen drawer 11 days earlier, and was, for the first time, reading the insured value line all the way to the end. That's the midpoint. That's where the floor changed under their feet, and they didn't even know it yet, because the floor doesn't announce itself. It just isn't there anymore when you go to step on it. I should tell you what happened in that kitchen because I wasn't there for it firsthand. Hadley told me later, word for word, the way teenagers do when they've witnessed an adult's certainty crack in real time and want someone to confirm it actually happened. Brooke had pulled the folder out to file the loan agreement away. Tidy woman, tidy paperwork, even when the paperwork wasn't really hers to keep. And she'd read, this time slowly, the line she'd skimmed past on the morning of the shoot. Insured value. The number. She'd read it twice, Hadley said, and then a third time. And then she'd said, out loud, to no one, "That can't be right," in a voice that had lost its usual polish entirely. Connor came in from the garage smelling of cold air and pine needles from hauling out the tree, and Brooke had turned to him holding that paper, like it had grown suddenly heavier in her hand, and said, "Connor, did you know what that painting was actually worth?" "And my son. And I love him. I want that on the record. This whole story is, underneath everything, about loving someone enough to finally tell them the truth," my son said. "It's one of Mom's old paintings. It's been in the dining room my whole life." "It's not one of your mom's old paintings," Brooke said. "It's worth more than this house." I wasn't exaggerating that number, by the way, and I want you to sit with that for a second the way they had to. More than the house. The house Brooke had staged within an inch of its life for 13 days, candles and garlands and a cream color called oat, around a painting she'd asked to borrow the way you'd asked to borrow a serving platter. Here's the assumption I think you've been carrying since the start of this story, the one I'd like to gently turn over now. You've probably been picturing me as the woman who didn't fit the aesthetic, the clashing cardigan, the thing that had to be moved to the end, then moved out of frame entirely because she didn't photograph as elegantly as the room around her. I was never the thing that clashed with the elegance. I was the source of it. Every gold and rust and amber tone in that photograph that Desmond Caro was so proud of. Every bit of warmth that made 400 people open an envelope and think, what a beautiful family, came from 42 by 60 inches of canvas that I had owned, loved, insured, and chosen out of generosity to lend to people who didn't think to ask what it was worth before they decided I wasn't worth including. They didn't crop the embarrassment out of the picture. They cropped the woman who made the picture possible out of the picture she made possible. That is the whole story, if you want it in one sentence. Everything else is just how long it took them to find out. I drove home with the painting upright in my back seat, the cedar and rosewater smell of my own car around me, and I did not feel triumphant. I want to be honest about that too, because triumph isn't really what this was. I felt something quieter and colder, the feeling you get when a suspicion you'd been carrying politely finally gets confirmed in writing. I'd known, for years probably, in the small unspoken way you know things about people you love, that Connor and Brooke had started measuring contributions instead of feeling them. Who paid for what? Who fit which room? I just never had it written down before. Now I did. I hung the painting back in my own dining room that same afternoon, in the exact spot it had occupied since 1981, and the wall looked instantly, obviously right again, the way a sentence does when you finally fix the misplaced word. I stood in front of it for a long moment with a cup of tea going cold in my hand, the steam stopping, the surface going still and flat, and I thought, there. That's where you live. You don't go where you're borrowed to make other people look good. You go where you're loved without conditions. The phone call started 2 days later. Connor called first, on the 28th, the day before Brooke came to my house, and I could hear, before he even finished his first sentence, that this was an apology built entirely out of logistics rather than feeling, which you understand by now, was the whole disease in that house. "Mom, Brooke says the insurance on the painting lapsed for 2 days while it was at our place. There was a gap between when our homeowner's policy covered it and when yours kicked back in, and she's worried about the liability. And also, we wanted to ask if maybe for New Year's—" "Connor," I said. "Just his name. Calm. I have found, over 70 years, that saying a person's name and then stopping is one of the most effective sentences in the English language." He stopped. "I'm not angry about the insurance," I said. "I'm not even angry about the photo, not really, not anymore. I'm tired, sweetheart, of being treated like a line item in a budget instead of a person at a table. You can fix the first thing with a phone call to your agent. I don't know yet if you can fix the second." There was a long silence on his end. I let it sit. I have learned, in a framing shop, that silence around a piece of work is often the only honest review you'll get, and you should let people have it. "I didn't think about it that way," he said finally. Brooke handles the photo stuff. I don't really." "I know you don't," I said. "That's part of what I'm tired of too. Mom, it's not that I don't think about you. I trust her with the details. I always have. It never occurred to me that you'd be one of them." That sentence sat with me longer than I let on. There was no malice in it. That was almost the worst part. He wasn't choosing Brooke over me, not in any way he'd recognize as a choice. He'd simply stopped noticing that his mother was a detail that required choosing at all. The way you stop noticing a porch light that's been on so long you can't remember a time it wasn't. "Connor," I said, "when your father was alive, did either of us ever once have to write down what we were worth to each other?" "No," he said. "Of course not. That's because we never let anyone treat us like we needed to. The day you start needing a piece of paper to remind your family you matter, something's already gone quiet that shouldn't have. I don't want to need paper with you, Connor. I'd rather you just looked up from your shoes." I heard him exhale, slow, the kind of breath a man takes when he's just been told something true that he can't immediately do anything about. "I looked at my shoes," he said. "I remember doing that. I didn't think you noticed." "I notice everything," I said. "It's the job. You disappear so the art can be seen, but you still watch the whole room while you're doing it." He didn't have anything to say to that. Some truths don't get an answer, and I've come to believe that's all right. Not every sentence needs a reply. Some are just meant to be set down on the table and left there. Brooke came to see me in person on the 29th, and I want to tell you about that visit in full, because it's the one I opened this whole story with, and I think you deserve to see how we got there. She called ahead, which I'll credit her for. No ambush, no surprise at my door the way some people manage their guilt. "Can I come by?" she said. "I'd rather do this in person." I said yes, and I put the kettle on again, the same kettle, the same counter, only this time it was my own kitchen and my own quiet, and I set out 2 cups, because whatever else this conversation was going to be, I did not intend to be inhospitable in my own home. She arrived a little after 2, in a coat the color of oat. Of course it was. And she stood in my dining room for a long moment before she said anything at all, looking at the painting back on its wall, gold and rust and the particular slant of light Otto Halverson got right exactly once. Before a creamery took the rest of his working life, she had, I noticed, brought nothing with her. No gift, no peace offering, just herself and whatever she'd rehearsed in the car. "It looks different here," she said finally. "Bigger, almost." "It's the same size it's always been," I said. "Rooms just make things look like whatever the room needs them to look like." We sat at my dining table, the white oak one Arna built the spring of 2004, the one with the slight burn mark near the left leg from a candle incident in 2011 that nobody in this family has ever let me live down, and I poured the tea, and I let her start. "I read the loan agreement again last night," she said, "all the way through this time." "I know," I said. "I could tell when you called this morning that your voice had changed." She turned her cup slowly on its saucer, not drinking from it, the way people do when their hands need something to do that isn't picking up a phone or twisting a ring. "I want to apologize, really apologize. Not the insurance thing, the photo." "All right," I said. "I'm listening." "I didn't think about it as cutting you out," she said. "I thought about it as fixing the composition. 5 people doesn't always balance in a frame the way 4 does. I do this with clients' living rooms all the time. You take one chair out and the whole room breathes better. I treated you like the chair, Pearl. I didn't even notice I was doing it until I read that piece of paper and realized the chair was worth more than every room I've ever staged combined." It was, I'll admit, the most honest sentence she'd said to me in 9 years of marriage to my son, and there was something almost admirable in how plainly she said it. No excuse dressed up as an explanation, just the bald shape of the thing sitting on the table between us like the teacup neither of us had touched. This is where I reached into the folder I'd brought to the table, the same folder that had been sitting in a hat box in my closet, and set the bill of sale down in front of her, 11 by 14, Cream paper, Arnie's signature notarized at the bottom in ink, gone the color of weak tea. "I want to ask you something," I said, "and I want you to actually answer it instead of fixing it. Did it occur to you, even once, while you were planning that shoot, that the elegance you wanted in that photograph was sitting in my dining room for 40 years before it ever sat in yours for 13 days? The silence that followed was longer than any silence we'd had between us in 9 years. "No," she said finally. "Honestly, no. I think I assumed beautiful things just belong wherever they look best." "They belong," I said, "to whoever loved them when nobody else thought they were worth $600. I did not raise my voice. I have never needed to. "Brooke, I think you should look at the back of that painting before you hang it anywhere else. There's a number on the appraisal stapled to the frame backing. I'd like you to actually read it this time." She didn't move for a moment. Then she nodded slowly, the way you nod when a number has finally arrived at the place in your chest where understanding lives, instead of just the place where information passes through. "You will be in the next one," she said. "I promise you will be. I want to tell you I believed her completely in that moment, and mostly I did. But I also want to be honest that promises made in the heat of being caught are a different animal from promises kept 11 months later, when the cream-colored garlands are back out and the photographer is booked again. I didn't know yet, on December 29th, which kind this one would turn out to be. I only knew I'd said what needed saying, and that I'd said it without raising my voice, because I never needed to. The paper had already said the loud part for me. Hadley texted me before anyone else called. 16 years old, and she'd been the only one in that house, besides me, who'd understood instantly what had happened in that living room, even if she hadn't had the words for it yet. "Grandma," she wrote, "I knew it was wrong when they did it, and I didn't say anything. I'm sorry." Then, a minute later, a second text. "Was the painting really worth that much?" I called her instead of texting back, because some conversations deserve a voice instead of a screen. "It was worth that much," I said, "and you don't need to apologize for not saying anything. You were 16 in a room full of adults who should have known better. It's not a job for you. Mom keeps saying it like it's a fun fact now. Like, guess what Grandma's painting is actually worth?" To everyone she talks to. A pause, and then in the particular flat honesty of teenagers who haven't yet learned to soften things for adults. It's kind of gross, actually. Like she only cares now because of the number. "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe the number is just the thing that finally got her attention. Not everyone learns the same way, Hadley. Some people need a feeling. Some people need a number on a piece of paper. I'd rather she learned slow and true than not learned at all." "Would you have told her if she never found the folder?" I thought about that question longer than I let her hear me think about it. "Probably not directly," I said. "I might have just quietly stopped lending things. People notice absence faster than they notice disrespect. I was prepared to let the painting do the talking, one way or another. That's kind of terrifying, Grandma." "It's called patience," I said. "It looks like terrifying from the outside sometimes." She laughed, the real laugh, not the careful one she'd been giving the camera all December, and for a moment the whole strange business of borrowed walls and cropped photographs felt smaller than it had in weeks, sitting next to the plain fact of a granddaughter who'd noticed, and minded, and told me so. Desmond Caro's voice on the phone was careful in the way professionals get careful when they sense a liability conversation forming somewhere out of sight. "Mrs. Lindqvist, I wanted to reach out personally. I understand there was some confusion about the composition choices on the 14th, and I want you to know that wasn't direction I would have given if I'd had the full picture." "Why did you give it then?" I asked, not unkindly. I was genuinely curious. He paused. "Honestly? Brooke's a repeat client and a referral source. When a client tells me what they want cropped, I crop it. I don't usually ask why. I should have asked why." Another pause, and then the one human thing he said in the whole call, the thing that kept him, in my mind, from becoming simply a tool in someone else's hands. "I have a mother. I wouldn't want anyone doing to her what I did to you, and I'm sorry I didn't think about that until I was looking at my own invoice and realized I'd been paid to make a grandmother disappear from her own family's Christmas." I told him I appreciated that, and I meant it, And I told him something else too, because I am, after everything, still a woman who spent 31 years caring about how art gets handled. Next time a client asks you to crop someone out of a photograph for the sake of the composition, you might ask whose composition you're actually looking at. He didn't have an answer for that either. I didn't expect one. Some sentences are meant to travel home with a person and do their work later, quietly, the way mine had been doing in that envelope under my coat for 11 whole days before anyone bothered to read it properly. The new portrait, 5 people this time, taken the second week of January, no photographer's fee charged because Desmond insisted no studio lights, just the 5 of us in my own dining room in front of October light, hanging exactly where it belonged. Sits on Connor's mantel, now next to the one with the gap in it. He kept the old one too. I asked him why once, half expecting some sentimental answer about family history. So, I remember, he said, what it looks like when I'm not paying attention. That was, I think, the most honest thing my son has ever said to me, and I have decided to let it stand as the apology because some people show you they've learned something not by saying sorry beautifully, but by keeping the evidence of their mistake where they'll have to look at it. I want to bring this back before I let you go, to something larger than one painting and one family and one Christmas card, because I suspect that's why you're still listening. This isn't really a story about art. It's about the particular arithmetic certain families do without ever saying it out loud, deciding, photograph by photograph, decision by decision, who counts as the picture and who counts as the framework holding the picture up. Mothers do this, grandmothers especially. We become, somewhere in our 60s or 70s, the wall the good light falls on rather than the woman standing in it. We pay for things, and we're thanked with logistics. We lend things, and we're thanked with a mission. And because we love the people doing it to us, we tend to let it happen quietly, year after year, December after December, telling ourselves, it's not worth the conflict, it's just a photo, it's just a sweater, it's just a chair moved out of frame for better composition. If you're watching this and some part of you just went very still, I want you to know that stillness is not weakness. It's recognition. Maybe yours wasn't a painting. Maybe it was the down payment nobody mentioned at the closing. Maybe it was the recipe everyone uses at every holiday and nobody credits. Maybe it was simply your chair, pulled quietly out of every photograph for 10 years running, until one day you noticed you'd stopped expecting to be in the frame at all. I am not going to tell you how that feels. You already know exactly how it feels. I'm only going to tell you that it doesn't have to stay that way, and that the way out of it is rarely loud. I am telling you tonight that it is worth the conflict. Not the shouting kind. I have never once raised my voice in this whole story, and I am not going to start now, but the quiet kind, the kind where you write things down, where you keep the receipt, where you remember, the way I remembered for 40 years, without ever needing to bring it up at a single holiday dinner, exactly what you are worth and exactly what you have given, so that when the day comes, and it does come, it came for me in a kitchen with a cooling kettle, you are not left arguing from feeling against people who only understand line items. You hand them the line item. You let the number do what your dignity has been too patient to do on its own. I think a great many women my age were raised to believe that keeping the peace and keeping yourself were the same project, and that any woman who insisted on being seen was making trouble where there didn't need to be any. I don't believe that anymore, if I ever fully did. I think keeping the peace and keeping yourself are 2 entirely different jobs, and somewhere along the way, a lot of us agreed to do only the first one, indefinitely. Without noticing, the second one had quietly stopped getting done at all. You can do both. I did both. I ate the shortbread. I said the meal was lovely. I let Brooke say something like it, without correcting her in front of the children. And I also drove home with that painting in my back seat, the very day the agreement said I could. No apology requested, no permission asked. Peace and self-respect are not opposites. They only look that way to people who've never had to hold both at the same table. You can crop a woman out of a photograph. You cannot crop her out of the deed, the bill of sale, the appraisal, the 40 years on the wall before anyone else thought to look at it twice. The picture only ever looked beautiful because of what she'd already given it, long before anyone aimed a camera at the room. Take her out of the frame, and you haven't removed the embarrassment. You've just shown everyone eventually exactly where the elegance was coming from all along. I think about Otto Halverson sometimes. More than is probably reasonable for a painting I've owned for 45 years. He never knew, standing in a creamery in Wadena, scooping curds into cheesecloth, smelling of whey instead of linseed oil, that the one canvas he'd sold for almost nothing to make rent would end up doing more to correct a family's understanding of value than anything he said. Well, he was alive to say it. Nobody listened to him about his own worth either, I imagine. The painting had to do the talking for both of us, eventually, in its own time, in its own house. This past December, the family came back to my condo for the holiday instead of the other way around. Brooke asked, this time properly, weeks in advance, whether I'd mind if Desmond came to photograph everyone in front of the painting again, in my dining room, where it actually lives. No borrowing required. I said yes. I stood exactly where I wanted to stand, dead center, between my son and my granddaughter, and nobody asked me to change my cardigan. I wore the maroon one, the one that supposedly clashed with everything, and it sat there in the photograph against the gold of the painting, looking, if I'm honest, rather wonderful. A deep, warm red against autumn light, the kind of contrast a good composition actually wants. The kind no one in that house seemed to understand until they'd been forced to slow down and actually look. I still have that first Christmas card, the one with the gap in it, the one with 4 smiling faces in front of a field of gold and rust that used to belong only to me and Arna, and a worn spot on our dining room wall. I keep it in the hat box with the loan agreement and the appraisal and the bill of sale with my husband's tea-colored signature. I take it out sometimes, not out of bitterness, but the way you'd look at an old photograph of a house before renovation to remember what the gap looked like, so you never stop noticing when someone tries to make one again. The painting hangs where it has always hung. The light still falls on it the same way it did in 1958, gold catching the brush strokes Otto Halverson laid down the year before he put his brushes away forever and went to work in a creamery, never knowing that one canvas would end up, decades later, quietly correcting an entire family's idea of who held the value in the room. I have my tea every morning underneath it, and some mornings I think of nothing at all, and some mornings I think of a kettle going cold, a folder under a coat, and a son looking at his shoes instead of at his mother, and I think, that's the photograph nobody printed. That's the one I'll remember longest, not the one with the gap in it, and not even the one that replaced it, but the quiet, certain minute, alone in my kitchen, when I understood exactly what I was holding, and exactly when I would choose to set it down on the table. I never raised my voice. I never had to. The paper did what paper does when you've kept it long enough, carefully enough, true enough. It simply waited, the way I'd been taught to wait, for the one moment when being right would finally matter more than being quiet. That moment came on its own time, the way these things do, and when it came, I was ready, and the room got very still, and nobody in it ever looked at me the same careless way again.